Scott. It's been a good evening so far. We've heard a lot of good information. And as we said early on, we have three very good choices. We're going to hear now about a third choice. John Tanner is here with us. John and I, like Alan, we've been friends a long time. We were teammates in seminary playing golf against Barry Dunn and my brother Keith. And we won the last match the last year to win the series. So John and I are the champs, and I won't ever let Barry forget that. But I also, as I was Alan's pastor, his parents' pastor, I also was John's parents' pastor at Tuscumbia. A lot of ministers have come out of Tuscumbia Methodist Church. At one time, there were 26. While I was there were 26 folks in full-time ministry that were out of the Tuscumbia Church. John Tanner comes from a godly family. He was the planting pastor for the Cove Church in 1996. Is that correct, John? So he's been there a while. It's in the Hampton Cove area. They were United Methodist Church until this last December. They disaffiliated. He and Tommy Gray at Asbury are the two key leaders that are putting together the Forged Network. Formerly United Methodist churches, basically in the state of Alabama, that are part of a network, an association, not a denomination. So John, would you come and share with us about the Forged Network, and then as you've seen, entertain questions at the end. Let's give John a round of applause for being here tonight. Thank you.
It's really great to be with you all. Cool to be here in this church with two of my longtime great friends, and thanks for that memory. I think Barry missed the putt, if I remember. It was a short putt, and but anyway. So and Mike Pope is y'all. You've got such a great pastoral team here, and Mike Pope, as he mentioned, my family. He was my family's pastor at Tuscumbia First for several years, and I just remember a lot of moments, especially when we buried my dad, and have moments like that where Mike was my pastor, during that time, and you got a good one, folks. Thank God for that. And our roots there, actually, your dad, Clark Pope, and my pastor out in Paris, and all those years there, I feel like there's a lot of just common ancestry, spiritual ancestry in the Hartselle Church and the Tuscumbia Church. I see them as sister churches, and I know my brother Tom, his son Mason, for those of you involved in camp meeting, have been regularly engaged in the camp meeting, and so there's a lot of good common heritage here. So one more little point of personal privilege, and then I'll try to be brief, but hopefully helpful with the content that I deliver. So how many of you here are like Hartselle natives, like you grew up in Hartselle? Pretty good number of you. Anybody go attend Hartselle High School like in the early 80s? We got anybody early 80s here? Okay, a few? Okay, so I have a bone to pick. So my junior year, we thought we were pretty good at Dashler High School when we made the playoffs in football. We won the first round of the playoffs. I was actually looking back. I believe it or not, you can find this stuff online. I was looking back at the scores, and instead of talking about the Forge, I thought I would talk about high school football. But anyway, here's our last 7 games. We won 14-0, 34-0. We lost 7-6. We won 22-9, 10-0, 7-0. First round of the playoffs, we beat Winfield for the second time that year, 15-0. So we gave up 16 points in our last 7 games, including the first round of the playoffs, until we played Hartselle at our home stadium in the quarterfinals of the state, and we had the largest crowd in Dashler High School history up to that point. And Stevie Williams ran the opening kickoff back for a touchdown, and Hartselle beat us 35-0. So I just got to say, I'm still bitter about that game. But other than that, I'm glad to be here. So what I want to do with our time, I know it's valuable because the hour is late. I'm not you got three good choices, and I'm not going to try to convince you of the network. I'm going to try to be as clear as I can about the cons and the pros of going that route, and really honestly say why we felt compelled to go that route. And then you discern for yourselves, obviously. And I very highly respect the thorough discernment period that you folks are taking. That's very noteworthy. So I'm actually going to start with the cons. So to me, the cons of going the route of an independent network are somewhat obvious, but I feel like it's important to name them. And that is, there's a vulnerability that comes with autonomy, that you, as much as you can have that collaboration of a connection, which I'll talk about in a few moments, you don't have that legally, and you don't have that formally. And so there's a sense in which you kind of feel like you're just out there. And for some folks that, in some churches and some church cultures, that's difficult. I will say, particularly small churches. And so you're not a small church, but that is something that I think, that's why I actually advise most small churches that I talk to consider the global, or the Free Methodist or other options, but particularly the global. And so there's some other cultural reasons I'll get to why to consider global, but for smaller churches, and then what kind of goes along with that is pastoral leadership. And so in the independent network, and I'll get to why I don't like that word, but the independent network is not an appointment system. And so all staffing matters, including your senior pastor, are the responsibility of that local church, and the whatever the structure is with the board of elders, or board of directors, or whatever to be. So it is a call system, and that just has that has its pros and cons. For us, our church culture where we are, we prefer that. I'll get to that in a minute, but that pastoral leadership piece is one of the sticking points for a lot of folks as far as going independent. And then also there's accountability. We know we got an accountability problem. We had an accountability problem in the United Methodist Church, but done well, there's a strength. And I'll admit, I actually felt that a little bit after we voted to disaffiliate, just the realization that I don't have a district superintendent. And it's easy to think that's totally positive, and it was somewhat positive in certain ways, but that covering of having a district superintendent and a bishop has a sense, and I was blessed to have good ones, so there was a sense of that covering, and that person to go to that was my boss, so to speak, and not just like a senior colleague like it would be the case in the network. There's a lack of clarity in some ways. Like, you'll ask me questions at the end of this time maybe, and I may not have the answer to those questions, because we are, as Brian Collier, the co-founder of the Foundry Network, which is our larger national network, we're building this plane as we fly it. And one of the engineers at Tommy's church at Asbury said, "You do know that's impossible, don't you? You can't build a plane, while you're flying it." But there is some ambiguity, almost inherent ambiguity. And then I'll say it's a lot of work up front. When you go through the process of your own bylaws, your own faith and practice documents, your own processes for ordination, all those kind of things, it's a lot more work up front. There's nobody doing that work for you at some kind of headquarters. And so now you can share, we do Google Docs, with our other local churches in the Foundry and in Forge. But you do realize that you just kind of own your own, and that has strengths and weaknesses. And so those are some of the cons. And I want to say why we chose the network over what some of the other options were, including the global. And again, this is with all due respect to the global, which many of my friends, including Alan Beasley, who came out of my home church and is also a dear friend, and many, many close dear friends of mine who are key leaders in the global Methodist Church. So I wish it well and believe it's important. That's a movement that's important. I'm just going to tell you why we felt like it was not the right the right destination for our local church, and hopefully that might help you decide, whether it is for your church. We had a real, and it's part of our church, our local church's culture, we had a real desire to go forward. And again, I'm not saying Global and others do not, but the Global's new, so I'll keep naming it, that it's not desirous to go forward. But, to me, it's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do something different and to be on the ground level of something. And there's some aspects of the Global Methodist structure that felt somewhat to us too similar, like UMC 2.0. And we really, for our local church, it didn't, we weren't really interested in kind of what we called UMC 2.0. Now, there are churches that is really, really important and helpful to have continuity. And basically, they're like, and our local church has had continuity, that our members can hardly tell any difference, except we feel like the winds of the Spirit are blowing in some new ways right now, and so it's better, but we feel freed. But it's not like a lot. We didn't have take signs down. We didn't have to change because we were kind of branded non-denominational anyway, and it's like nothing's changed on the day-to-day operation of our church or Sunday to Sunday. But continuity for some Global Methodist church is basically like, so all we have to do is take United out of the name. And other than that, it feels very familiar. And so a little bit different logo. No cross and flame, United is out, and to say such and such, county seat town, small town, name, whatever, Methodist, it's like, oh, thank God. We're still who we've been. We're still Methodists, and by name, not just by theology. And that's important to a certain sector of people, and I completely respect that and understand it. That's just not who our church, that's not a part of our church. We're not a 200-year-old historic church, downtown with a tall steeple and that kind of, it's just not, we're more of a newer church, and we are, we've been casual, modern worship from the day one, and so for us, that was not, that continuity with our denominational heritage was not something that mattered a lot, to our people. And so whereas some value continuity, we valued change. We were embracing that. So we're like, okay, let's not go back, even some of the, we're not going to dial it back to the good old days of whenever that was, 1950s. We want to go forward into the 21st century. And so we call it door number 3. Anybody remember Let's Make a Deal? Monty Hall. What a great show. I'm dating myself a little bit, but Monty Hall, Let's Make a Deal. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. We saw Stay UMC's door number 1, denomination, other denominational, we didn't seriously consider anything else but Global, door number 2, and then we like what we called door number 3 because it was a chance for us to be a part of something really that felt new from day one. And again, fit us better. I told our people, our congregation as well as our leaders, that I don't have that many good years left in full-time ministry, and I don't know, I'm 59 years old, I've got a few years left in me maybe, but I don't think I'm going to do the Nick Saban route or much less the Bobby Bowden, Joe Paterno route. But for however long I devote myself to full-time leadership in public ministry, in full-time ministry, I can't say, I could say, but I won't say what I'm going to devote it to. But I can tell you what I'm not going to devote it to, and that's denominational politics. I'm over that, and so this gives us a chance to do something that's completely free of that, however you might define it. And also it's movemental. We would so much rather be a part of a movement than an institution, and again, don't take this as me casting aspersions at any other choice. It's just for us, this felt more movemental to us than institutional. and which is kind of new wineskins for new wine. And that's, to me, what the Methodist movement was all about, and we want to be a part of something like that for our day. So, moving forward. Secondly, it was just the better fit. And again, it's not the best fit for everyone, it was just the best fit for us. It's not true of every church. And I've named some of the reasons that is already, so I won't repeat that. But I was thinking about, as I was imagining this conversation, what crossed my mind was like if you're hiring a staff person. If you're hiring someone, we learned a few years ago that there's a few things that are really important. They all happen to start with C, which is helpful, but character, competency, culture, and chemistry. And to me, if you're hiring your next, expression that you're going to, if you want to think of it that way, if you're affiliating with, you want those things. You want character, competency, culture, and chemistry. And so you have character in all three of these choices that you have. And I think you have competency in all three of those choices. The question is culture and chemistry. With the culture and the chemistry, what will be the right fit for Hartselle? And only you and your leadership can decide that. But for us, it was actually culture and chemistry that drove us to this choice. It was the feel, the vibe, sensing that this is our tribe, and then also that we could come alongside and learn from these other churches, and we could be, as iron sharpens iron, we could sharpen one another, and we fit, and we like the people. We went on a retreat just a few weeks ago, and my wife accompanied me on this retreat for the Foundry Network, which is the national network that Asbury and Cove affiliated with, and then we are given the opportunity to start a hub, and the hub network for the state of Alabama, underneath the Foundry Network is what we are talking about here tonight, the Forge Network. But we went to the retreat for the Foundry pastors, the first retreat, and at that retreat, my wife, left, and she doesn't get excited about these type of events. She never accompanied me to annual conference after she did it once in 1989. But anyway, so we came back from that, and she said, "I like these people. This is exciting. This is energizing, and these are competent, normal, people that actually have a chance to change the world." And that's one thing I like about Forged, is to get to just have that tight-knit relationship with other very competent, forward-thinking leaders. And so, anyway, I'll just close with this word, forged. By the way, I forgot my third point, financial stewardship. You care about that, I'm sure, you wouldn't be here, but it's the financial stewardship aspect of it, but I know that's been spelled out for you. But I'm actually very pleased to see what the global Methodist leadership of our North Alabama area have done. It actually takes away some of what one of my biggest fears would have been for the global Methodist Church. They are doing everything they can to keep that cost of that denominational giving down. That's a positive sign. I will say that very clearly. But we also kind of like the zero number. Sounds really good for us. And so that's a big draw. And that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to be super generous at things outside our walls. It just means that we get to control what our local and global mission partnerships are. So, close with just this idea of what forged means, the word. I'm kind of a word guy, word nerd, so I like looking up things in the dictionary and looking at their etymology and all that kind of jazz. But the noun forge means a furnace or shop where metal is heated or wrought. But the verb form has like three separate meanings, and I think all three of them are kind of informative about who we are. Definition one is to form something such as metal by heating or hammering. And as iron sharpens iron, even through some suffering that many of us have been through as leaders in these last 3 years, we feel like God is shaping us and forming us for as weapons for spiritual warfare that he's leading us into very clearly. And we hope we're being appropriately surrendered and malleable in his hand. Second, to move forward slowly and steadily, or to move with a sudden increase of speed and power, as in to forge ahead or forge into the lead. We feel like that's what we're doing with the Forge Network, is we're able to get with others, and we're moving forward, as I said. And then the third is to form or bring into being, especially by an expenditure or effort, as in to forge a bond. And that's another thing that we feel like we're doing through the network model as opposed to a denomination, is because it's so organic and because it's smaller, we feel like we have the opportunity to really have a forged family of churches and leaders that are all on the same page going forward. It takes effort to do that, but we believe that the effort is worth it. And so that's a little bit about Forged, and I'll be glad to take any questions that y'all have, at least till they tell me our time is completely up.
Can you explain a little more about the hub network, kind of the structure for the Alabama churches?
Yeah, I wish I had the visual of it. Tommy Gray had if anybody, I could send that to y'all if you don't have it already, but there's a really good visual that they prepared that kind of shows the churches. But the Foundry Network is made up of, and they're separate. It's not like if you join Forge, you're not really joining the Foundry Network. It's just that the Foundry Network, we want to keep it small, so it's kind of a network of networks, if you will. And so we're members of the Foundry, and other people, thank God, are leading that. But Tommy and I and Asbury and Cove are leading what they called hubs. And hubs are basically a more smaller local expression of that are started by Foundry member churches. And so Forged, as it stands right now, whereas the Foundry has about 15 churches that are across the nation, only 2 of which are in the state of Alabama, which is Asbury and Cove, we together decided to form a state of Alabama. And that doesn't mean that if there's some other one in North Georgia that doesn't have a place to land couldn't get in. But right now we're focused on Alabama. But we have churches from Huntsville, churches from Birmingham, churches from Auburn, Montgomery area. And so all over the state, we've got about the same number of churches as about 15 churches so far that are saying, hey, we want to be a part of this. And we do have a process where you apply. It's a very simple process, but it's a process nonetheless, and you have to agree to our basic doctrinal standards. And we do have a statement of faith and all those kind of things where we ask people to adhere to our clearly biblical statement of doctrine. But other than that, it's just if your heart, is with our heart to do this work together and you'll covenant with us to do it, then other than the doctrinal agreement, there's no other requirements, and there's nothing legal about it. You're still your autonomous local church, but it helps you to have an association of churches to belong to. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's about what we have so far.
Is it true that either the or the Foundry have membership minimums for the local church?
Foundry has loose minimums because the purpose of the Foundry and the idea behind that is to have churches that could learn best practices from one another. And so the founders, I was not a part of that. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just I was not a part of that. But it was they did establish, and they're still trying to figure out how do you enforce that, because everything's changed so much with COVID and everything else. But it is, by definition, a network of larger churches, large independent churches in the Wesleyan tradition. And so we're one of the smallest churches at Cove there, but Forged has no such standard. There'll be churches in Forged that are much smaller than Hartselle. And that's one of the things I like about it, is because we got In Montgomery and Auburn, we got 2 brand new church plants, and these churches they're growing. I mean, they're growing fast, but they're brand new, so they're smaller. And I think all these different sized churches and different stages, we can really learn from one another. And one of the joys so far has just been have that relationship with those 2 pastors churches are like, 5, 6, 7 years old, to begin to form those kind of mentor type relationships that are very organic. I'm not anybody's district superintendent or presiding elder, but I am a friend and a person that's a little more experienced, shall we say, than some of the younger pastors in the network. And so everything that we do like that is more organic, but we've got all churches of all kinds, all different sizes.
I think you may have answered one of my questions, but I'm going to restate it, and I have a second one. I'm looking at our church DNA, medium-sized town.
Yeah.
Church has been here a long time. At this point in our history, it's a big church to manage because we have valuable resources in our property. It doesn't, and my question is partially about ordination.
Yeah.
We would need a person who had X number of years managing a church of this size. And how do you match that up with what your resources are?
Yeah.
And so my next question will be a part of that too. We aren't an urban church. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying, most of these churches are urban. Now, we have a few urban problems here, but we don't have the ones that you may have to meet on a day-to-day basis. And I don't see us as being changed that much, although there is a great influx of people here in Hartsville. I don't think it's going to change us that much. We are not a sleepy town. We have good leadership. We have great leadership here in the church, but I don't see us being changed. And I was just looking around. We are people that follow rules. I'm just going to ask, how many of you in this room are school teachers or retired educators or on boards?
Wow.
So we follow rules really well.
Yeah.
And we like rules, but we don't like to make very many of them.
Yeah.
So my 2 questions are urban versus, we're not rural, but we're not urban.
Yeah.
And how do you get the right person in a church of our size?
Yeah, those are reasonable questions, and I would say suburban for the most part as opposed to urban. And I think we need to be planting churches in cities, urban, suburban, county seat towns, medium-sized towns. I did stop and eat before I came in here downtown Hartsville at Moe's, and I was like, man, this downtown's hopping. I mean, my Tuscumbia is sleepier, than this. There's a vitality to this town. So there's plenty of people to reach. We know that. So there's a lot of opportunity, missional opportunity in this city. But I get your point, and it is a part of the culture thing, is that there's suburban and urban churches may have some things in common, and as far as kind of what I call culture forward. You can be theologically traditional, but be kind of culture forward. And so that may be part of the fit, issue for a small town, medium to large size church in a small town, which I understand is where I grew up in. Tuscumbia First is a church so similar to this one. And so, except for you're larger, than our church is now. But the leadership question is going to be the big one, for y'all, and how, because it's easy for me. And again, I told Mike and Barry, I don't want y'all to get upset with me if you want me to argue for it. I'm going to try to be as neutral and as informative as I can be. I don't talk you out of it. I won't try to talk you into it. But Barry, Tommy, Gray, myself, Mike, Barry, we're all good friends. But we also, none of us are, Tommy, I may be the youngest of the group, and by just a few months of Barry and Tommy. And that's not young. So there's going to be new senior leadership, and you don't need to make decisions based on your current pastoral leadership. Now you have to listen to your current pastoral leadership, but you have to think about the next. And the next, I do think there's a lot of opportunity for shared resourcing and networking. And for us, we like that. We prefer, our board, for instance, strongly prefers to do our own succession planning. But we don't have to do it alone now. We can do it. This just happened today. One of our churches in Houston from the Foundry Network sent an email to all the other pastors and said, hey, one of our campus, a multi-site church, one of our campus pastors that used to be a campus pastor for us, pastored a church in the Houston area for a while, and now their church is not disaffiliating or something like that, and they're going to be looking for a place to land. They're really great. This is a little bit about them. Here's your resume. If anybody has, it's that kind of informal network that we believe. And then also we're in a process of internships and even a relationship that we're building with Asbury Seminary, with a local hub for that we're working on, a cohort in the Huntsville area for Asbury Seminary, ministry in residence. So developing young leaders is a huge priority for us for future pastoral leadership. But to your point, we know that you're not going to be taking probably a 28-year-old senior pastor here. You're going to need someone more seasoned. And I think you can find them through networking better than what the United Methodist system has been doing for you. No offense to Mike. That one worked, right? No. By that I mean overall, not at Hartselle. But I will say that I don't know that the independent network would be as advantageous over, say, the global or the free. I do know it'll be a whole lot better than the UMC deployment process of what the pool would be. And so that's a big issue for y'all to decide, is how you want to do future leadership, particularly clergy leadership. Do you want to do it, find that person on your own, or do you rather have a denomination that will help you find them? So.
We have two last questions, and it'll take real quick.
I give long answers, I'm sorry.
That's all right. He's wanting to go.
I'm known for that.
You want to go first?
Doesn't matter to me. Since you offered, I'll go first.
I'll take the mine. I want it.
I do have a question here that I read this little handout that we have, and it mentions the position on abortion, and it suggests that you're okay if Church B has a position that abortion is okay. Now, if that's true, then I'd like to know, do you lend tacit support to that church that supports abortion?
To be honest with you, I've not been asked that question, and I looked through the handout, but I would actually have to go back and look at the Forge Network document to see if we address that. Now, we're clearly pro-life. Now, we believe, I'm talking about our local church. And any of the local churches that are involved with us. But whether or not we have, again, it's an organic relationship of churches. And so as much as I strongly believe know where I stand on that issue, whether or not that would be to the point of keeping a church out if they took a softer stance on that, I can't really answer that question. I would have to look back and see if it's written in our main doctrinal statement or not. So I can get back to you on that. I'll email your pastors the answer to that. I know in our own, see, the thing is, and this is a really important piece of understanding what it means to be independent. I don't like the word independent. I'd rather be interdependent with other churches, but technically it's independent. And when you're an independent church, you determine your own legal bylaws and doctrine and discipline. So right now, you're talking about a bear, we have been working feverishly. We're still not finished with ours, and we've been out for several months. But we will have our own doctrine and discipline statements as our local churches that has a lot more detail to it than the forged, brief doctrinal statement. And so it's at to your point, it's an important point, but it's at the local level that all those kind of things will be made most clear. So.
Thank you, John.
Yes, sir.